So the situation with South Africa's National Defence Force Chief, Roudzani Mhwane, is becoming quite the brouhaha, quite the imbroglio, with different elements of the South African government coming out on both sides of it. Initially, the Foreign Ministry and the Defense Department both came out saying that they are disavowing themselves from his comments while he was in Iran. To recap, this general, who is the chief of the Defense Force, went to Iran on a security cooperation visit and played the role of diplomat or foreign minister or head of the republic, none of which is actually his role. As a military officer, his responsibility falls within the lanes of defense and security, not with the things he talked about. There he expressed solidarity with the Iranian government and its pro-terror positions. He also expressed disdain for Israel and for the United States, lumping the United States into the conflict for which it's not involved. Now, never mind that this complicates matters between South Africa's ruling ANC, which rules foreign policy entirely. As they've made clear, none of their coalition partners have any say in foreign affairs. They've made that quite clear, refusing to talk to their coalition partner, Corne Mulder, after he returned from the United States, saying that Freedom Front Plus has no role in foreign policy. That's ANC. And so the ANC is responsible for foreign policy, and they're responsible for this cock-up. Now, this is not an attack on South Africa or calling out this general in particular. It's making a point about military officers in general. Military officers have very specific lanes they're supposed to stay in. They're not supposed to venture outside those lanes and express their personal views in foreign policy. That's a no-no. That's no-go territory, and that's wading into the political field. And that is not the role of professional military. That's a role of corrupt militaries. That's a role of tyrannical dictators. That's a role of people who don't deserve to be in uniform. We've seen this happen many times in the past. Of course, we saw General MacArthur famously relieved by President Truman, which was very unpopular, but it was the right decision to make. MacArthur went beyond the bounds of his military role, of what his task was, expressing political views that were outside his lane and highly inappropriate. You cannot have military officers contradicting or making policy for a government. That's the role of military dictatorships, which are not welcome. South Africa is ostensibly a democratic nation. You can't have military generals running around and telling people what political views are. That cannot be done in public. They can share that in private with their friends, and probably not smart to even do it there. But it's certainly not appropriate for a military officer and the leader of the Chief of Defense Force, the CHOD, to actually run around to foreign countries, particularly a rogue nation like Iran, which most people around the world have problems with. A country that launched an attack in October of last year, sending hundreds of missiles, murdering Israeli civilians, unprovoked attack, a country that was recently attacked by Israel in a preventative measure, a country that has sponsored terrorism through Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. And this guy goes and expresses solidarity with them. That is highly inappropriate, wildly out of his lane. So what do we have happen? The foreign ministry, through their spokesman, said, Crispin Peary, said, nope, we have nothing to do with this. Only we and the president can make foreign policy. The Defense Department's initial reaction through a press release was that, no, only the DIRCO and the president make foreign policy, not the Department of Defense. The president's office, through Vincent Mongwenya, initially distanced himself, saying, hey, listen, this is not the purview of a military officer. It's the president's responsibility and DIRCO. So all three initially came out immediately against this. But since then, there's been backpedaling. The backpedaling, of course, comes from Minister 30%. Famously, the minister oversaw the deterioration and collapse of education in South Africa to the point where many adults who graduate from high school are functionally illiterate in their first language, let alone in English. They're functionally illiterate. As a consequence, South Africa's educational outcomes are abysmal and rank near the bottom. That's Minister 30%, Angie Motshekga. Of course, the reason we call her Minister 30% is because she and other ANC party members seem to think that a 30% standard is a good percentage for passing. So you're allowed to get 69% or 70% of the material incorrect, and you're considered to be a passing student. Only morons would come up with that. So we call Minister Angie Motshekga, who failed education and now is failing as defense minister, Minister 30%. She has backpedaled and said that she authorized the trip and it was okay he did nothing out of bounds. Well, the mere fact that she thinks that he did nothing out of bounds and inappropriate means that she should be sacked and fired as the Minister of Defense. She has no business in that role. If she doesn't understand the role of a military officer and when they're out of bounds and when they should be court-martialed, when they should be cashiered for their actions are inappropriate, then clearly she is not up to the task of being defense minister. Ramaphosa, if he was a legitimate leader, would cashier her, sack her tonight, and he would move Bantu Holomisa, a legitimate leader, up into the position of defense minister. This is the consequence of a person not qualified to serve as a minister of parliament, a person not qualified to serve as a member of the cabinet, who doesn't know what they're talking about and just spewing nonsense to cover this general's backside. The general was wrong. It was inappropriate. He should be fired in a minimum, possibly even court-martialed for stepping outside the bounds of his responsibilities. But whatever the case, he shouldn't be the chief of the South African National Defence Force. The fact that he's actually one of the handful of genuine Mkhonto-we-Sizwe MK veterans from the struggle, one of the very few, probably about 2,500 actual ones out there. A lot of wannabe pretenders that joined the MK Veterans Association with 100,000 members. There weren't 100,000 MK members in the bush, trust me, or putting bombs in South Africa. We're only talking about a few thousands. And he was one of them, but that doesn't justify him staying on as defense minister. And clearly, he thinks his role is to be a politician, not to be a military leader. He needs to be gone. She needs to be gone. And there's been some equivocating, some news reports from Ramaphosa's office that Ramaphosa is not going to take action. Well, once again, Cyril the Waffle Man steps forward and does nothing. This is an egregious offense. Military officers cannot be running around and making statements like this. The fact that it's exacerbated existing diplomatic row between the United States and South Africa makes it even worse. But take that out of the equation. This is a fireable offense on its surface, no matter what country he was talking about. This is not something military officers should be doing. It's wrong. It's inappropriate. Now, for all you couch potato, crisp eating, know-nothings, have never served in uniform, never served in the government, don't understand the role of the military, but just want to express your opinion, that's your prerogative. But I spent 36 years in uniform. I've worked with dozens of militaries around the world. I've taught military officers the basic civil rule. And I've been in charge of thousands of troops. And I've served in combat. I know what I am talking about. This man should be gone. He has no business being the chief of the defense force. Probably never should have been if this was his attitude all along. Just shows you the inept screening process that they use. It's about loyalty. Loyalty to the Thule House, not to the sovereign state of South Africa, that gets people promoted in the SANDF and in the ANC for that matter. So bottom line here is the general was wrong. The minister has made it worse by backing his inappropriate behavior. Inappropriate behavior. And it's time for them to be gone, both of them. What say you, South Africa, Mzansi? Where do you stand on this? Should the general be gone, or shall we allow him to continue? And what of Ramaphosa? What's his role in this? He should have spoken up by now, and he hasn't. That speaks volumes.